Only the Starbug's dome-shaped drive section, scorched black from its encounter with the ice planet's stratosphere, poked up through the slow shifting sea of snow dunes. Resting against the foot of the glacier, it fizzled and steamed for almost 5 days in the unrelenting blizzard before there was any sign of life. Finally, the small hatchway chinked open and light gushed out into the black Arctic night. Lister's face, encircled by parka fur, appeared grimacing in the opening. His gloved fingers folded around the rim of the hatchway before the blinding wind forced back the door and tried to close it on his head. The back of his skull slammed against the metal edging of the doorframe while the steel hatch jammed into his nose and began the slow business of cutting his head in two. He was helpless and close to blacking out. He was beginning to think that after all he'd been through, being dawed to death was a stupid way to die, when the wind changed direction for a second time and the hatchway gave to his frantic pushes. He fell out of the bug and teetered on a ledge of packed snow. He quickly discovered the only way to remain upright was to lean into the wind. He had to incline his body at an angle of 50 degrees. He felt absurd, but there was no other way of staying on his feet. He managed 3 steps at this angle before the blizzard inflated his parka hood and knocked him off the ledge. He slithered down the bank and dropped into the trough cut by Starbug's crash path. Gradually he hauled himself to his feet and unfastened the small ship-issue snow trowel which was tied to his waist. He looked at it. It measured scarcely 4 inches across. He looked at what little of the bug was visible above the drift. At a rough estimate, he would have to shift about 800 tons of snow if the bug was ever to move. He tried 2 trowelfuls before the erratic blizzard swirled into the trough and tossed him like a broken kite into a snowbank 50 feet away. Rimmer stooped over the communications console and barked into the microphone. "Mayday! Mayday! Can you read me? Come in, please!" He looked up at the screen, which continued to rasp its static gibberish. The Starbug's inner door hammered open, and a blizzard stumbled in, followed by Lister. The snow swirled around inside the craft like a swarm of trapped insects looking for an escape. Lister hurled himself against the inner door and fought it closed. Rimmer didn't look up from the communicator. "Still snowing, is it?"
"It's useless."
Lister flung his gloves against the bug's far bulkhead.
"You can hardly stand up, never mind dig it out."
He sneered at the static on the screen. 5 days had gone by, broadcasting on all frequencies, and still Red Dwarf hadn't acknowledged the SOS. Rimmer persisted. "Mayday! Mayday!" Lister took the rum bottle from his parka's emergency pocket, spun off the top, and tilted it to his lips. The alcohol was frozen solid. Holding the neck, he smashed the bottle on the corner of the table and gratefully sucked his rum lollipop. This was the last alcohol on board. He was beginning to panic. If they didn't get rescued soon, he might have to spend a night with Rimmer, sober. "Mayday! Mayday!" Rimmer turned. "I wonder why it's Mayday."
"Eh?"
"The distress call. Why do you say Mayday? It's just a bank holiday. Why not Shrove Tuesday or Ascension Sunday?" He turned back to the communicator. "Ascension Sunday! Ascension Sunday!" He thought for a while, and then tried, "The 14th Wednesday after Pentecost! The 14th Wednesday after Pentecost!"
"It's French, you doink. Help me. Mayday. How much food is there?"
Rimmer nodded at the navigation console. "I made a full list on the dictopad." Lister picked up Rimmer's voice-activated electronic diary and pressed play. The menu was meagre indeed. Half a bag of smoky bacon crisps, a tin of mustard powder, a brown lemon, 3 stale water biscuits, 2 bottles of vinegar, and a tube of Bonjela gum ointment. Lister looked up from the pad.
"Gum ointment?"
"I found it in the first aid box. It's that minty flavour. It's quite nice."
"It's quite nice if you smear it on your mouth, Ulcer, but you can't sit down and eat it."
Rimmer raised an eyebrow. "You may have to."
"Is that it? Nothing else?"
"Just a pot noodle. Oh, and I found a tin of dog food on the tool shelf." Misery hissed through Lister's gritted teeth.
"Well,"
he said finally.
Pretty obvious what gets eaten last. I can't stand pot noodles.
He huddled over the last remnants of fuel glowing in the mining brazier and tried not to think of food. 3 days had passed since he'd unzipped the last of the emergency seal meals. 3 days without proper food. In fact, he hadn't eaten at all since breakfast the previous morning, and that had only been a raw sprout and a piece of chewing gum he'd found stuck under the drive seat. It was all right for Rimmer. Rimmer was a hologram. He didn't have to eat. He couldn't feel the cold. He couldn't die. He replayed the food list again, desperately searching for something vaguely palatable. Rimmer argued that most of the food groups were represented. Vitamins, proteins, nutrients. If Lister paced himself, Rimmer pointed out, if he sat down and worked out a dietary program and stuck to it, the food could last him for 2 weeks. But, as Lister pointed out, Rimmer held that opinion because he was a dork. The argument ended in a long silence, broken only by the fizzling of the screen and the crackling of the brazier. It was Lister who spoke first. Predictably, he said,
God, I'm so hungry.
Stop thinking about food.
Take me mind off it, then talk about something.
Like what?
Anything.
Anything?
Anything apart from food.
Rimmer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Not small talk. He hated it. Like what?
I dunno,
Lister shrugged.
Tell me how you lost your virginity.
Rimmer yawned to conceal his panic.
Well, it was so long ago. I was so young and sexually precocious. I'm not sure I can remember. Everyone can remember how they lost their virginity.
Well, I don't. Good grief, you can hardly expect me to recall every single sexual liaison I've ever partaken of. What do you think I am, the memory man? Rimmer was babbling to buy himself thinking time. He'd always been a bit of a fish out of water when it came to women. Frankly, he'd always had a rather low sex drive, which he secretly ascribed to all the school cabbage he was forced to eat as a boy. What was a respectable age to claim he'd lost it? Certainly not 31. To a half-concussed flight technician who checked herself out of the recovery bay prematurely after a winch had fallen on her head, who was still wearing the bandages and was so disorientated she kept on calling him Alan. Certainly not that magical and lovely moment balanced precariously on the rim of the sleeping quarters sink. No, he must lie. But what lie? He had to macho the facts up a bit. What was a good age for a tough, sexually potent, rough-and-tumble type astro to have his cherry popped? Mid-20s? Early 20s?
Come on, Rimmer. The truth.
Then Rimmer remembered his first fumbled encounter at second base. He was 19. A slight tweaking of the facts, a slight blurring of the action, and that should be perfectly respectable. The very first time was this girl I met at cadet college, Sandra. We were both 19. We did it in the back of my brother's car.
What was it like?
Oh, fantastic, brilliant. Rimmer's eyes acquired a milky hue, and his mouth went dry. Bentley convertible, V8 turbo, walnut burr paddling. Beautiful machine, beautiful. So what about you? How did you lose yours?
Michelle Fisher. The 9th hole of Bootle Municipal Golf Course. Par 4, dogleg to the right and the bunker behind the green.
On a golf course?
Lister nodded.
A golf course? How old were you?
Lister wistfully prodded the dying coals in the brazier. She took all her clothes off and just stood there in front of me, completely naked. I was so excited I nearly dropped my skateboard.
Your skateboard? How old were you?
12.
12? 12 years old? When you lost your virginity, you were 12?
Yeah.
12?
Rimmer stared into the fire.
Well, you can't have been a full member of the golf club then.
Course I wasn't.
You did it on a golf course and you weren't a member?
Course I wasn't,
Lister repeated. So you didn't pay any green fees or anything?
It was just a place to go.
I used to play golf. I hate people who abuse the facilities. I hope you raked the sand back nicely before you left. That'd be a hell of a lie to get into, wouldn't it? Competition the next day and your ball lands in Lister's buttock crevice. You'd need more than a niblick to get that one out.
Are you trying to say I've got a big bum?
Big? It's like two badly parked Volkswagens.
12? Rimmer couldn't believe it. The only thing he'd ever lost when he was 12 were his Space Scout shoes, with the compass in the heel and the animal tracks on the soles. His best friend, the boy who bullied him least, Porky Roebuck, threw them in the septic tank behind the sports ground. He'd cried for weeks. He'd been wearing them.